The June night sky was pitch black, thick clouds hanging like heavy gray silk sheets, covering the entire space above the ocean. The Airbus A320 of Sky Asia Airlines was on its route from Singapore to Tokyo, carrying nearly 180 passengers and a crew of 7. In the cockpit, Captain Min Kai, a seasoned pilot with over 15,000 flight hours, quietly stared at the radar screen, his eyes glinting with concern. The weather was anything but favorable. A tropical storm had suddenly formed over the western Pacific, forcing their route to change constantly. The aircraft surged forward, piercing through layers of dense clouds. A violent jolt forced passengers in the cabin to grip their seatbelts tightly. In the cockpit, First Officer Tuan Kiet reported, "Captain, VHF communication with ATC is unstable. Sometimes the signal is lost entirely, sometimes it's just static." Kai frowned. Communication was the lifeblood of flying. Without contact with air traffic control, they were as good as blind, unaware of other planes' positions, unable to receive instructions during bad weather or route adjustments. He immediately switched to the backup HF channel, but the situation was no better. The signal was faint, fragmented, only crackling static. In that tense moment, Kai's memory flashed back. He recalled a routine maintenance check 2 weeks earlier. A technician had noted, "Antenna number 2 shows a loose fastener, needs monitoring. Contact slightly oxidized." At the time, due to a tight flight schedule, the aircraft only underwent quick servicing. No full replacement was made. "Minor fault, not critical," the report had stated. But now, in the storm, those seemingly trivial details emerged as a deadly threat. The aircraft's antenna was its ears and mouth. Just one broken fastener, one oxidized contact, or a loose coaxial cable could cripple the entire communication system. And that was exactly what was happening. Each time turbulence shook the plane, the antenna seemed to lose balance. Connections flickered, signals weakened. "Captain, should we try sending an emergency message via ACARS?" Kiet suggested. "Try it." Kai nodded, but the data system also depended on the VHF antenna. The outgoing packet immediately returned, failed. Kai bit his lip, his hand gripping the control yoke tightly. In the pitch-black night sky, the plane was adrift like a ship lost at sea. In the passenger cabin, Chief Flight Attendant Lan tried to keep everyone calm. She walked down the aisle, reassuring that the situation was under control. But inside, Lan knew the truth. Unstable communication meant hidden danger. She glanced at a young boy by the window, eyes wide with fear. She smiled at him, but her own heart pounded. Back in the cockpit, torrential rain lashed against the aircraft. Lightning split the night sky, revealing massive, rolling storm clouds like ocean waves. The weather radar showed a towering cumulonimbus ahead, reaching 40,000 feet. Without ATC guidance, it would be almost impossible to find a safe route. Kai decided, let's try manually adjusting the antenna angle. Maybe the turbulence is causing the disconnection. Keat quickly complied, but the result was the same. The signal fluctuated between poor and lost. Clearly, the issue wasn't weather alone, it was hardware, specifically the antenna assembly. In Kai's mind, a question echoed, if we had replaced that antenna fastener, cleaned off the oxidation during maintenance, would this be happening now? The thought pierced him. As captain, he knew responsibility ultimately fell on him. "We could try SATCOM," Kai said, voice controlled. "But it's costly and usually reserved for emergencies." "I'll activate it," Kiet replied. The satellite signal was faint but enough to transmit an emergency message. ATC on the ground acknowledged their position and advised a northeast deviation to avoid the massive storm cells. But as the data returned, the unstable antenna broke the stream, leaving incomplete instructions. The turbulence worsened. Suddenly, all communications went silent. Only the engines roared and the storm's howl remained. Kai and Keat exchanged a determined glance. They knew they were fighting for survival, not just against the storm, but against a handful of failing screws on the antenna that had betrayed them. The cockpit sank into heavy silence. Warning lights blinked red, green, yellow across the panels. Each beep pierced First Officer Keat's nerves. Captain Kai remained calm-voiced, but his sharp eyes swept every gauge. He knew one wrong decision could doom the 180 souls aboard. The Airbus A320 wrestled with the tropical storm. Outside, lightning flashed relentlessly, silver blades on the fuselage. Rain hammered the cockpit windows like metal bullets. In that moment, Kai felt how fragile the thin alloy shell was between humanity and nature's fury. "Captain, satellite signal just failed completely," Keat reported, voice trembling. "I know," Kai answered tersely. "That means we are completely alone now." He inhaled deeply, then ordered, "Keat, recheck the VHF antenna system. We must try everything to restore it." Keat opened the maintenance diagnostic screen. "VSWR high. Check coax connector. Impedance mismatch." The coaxial cable was at fault. A damp or oxidized contact could skew impedance, reflecting waves back instead of transmitting them. "Captain, most likely the coax is loose. In turbulence, it gets worse," Keat said grimly. "I agree, but at 34,000 feet, we can't step outside to tighten a cable." Kai paused, then, "There's one risky option. Switch to the backup antenna and adjust the angle via secondary system. It might help." They tried. The signal improved briefly, then collapsed back to poor. The antenna fastener was clearly failing. Each bank made it worse. In the cabin, turbulence triggered panic. Children cried, passengers prayed, trays clattered to the floor. Leon gripped a seat, announcing through the PA, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with belts fastened. The crew is ensuring maximum safety. Please trust us." But her own voice trembled as the jet jolted violently. She thought, "If we cannot communicate, do we have any way out?" Back in the cockpit, Kai recalled past aviation disasters sparked by the smallest faults: a screw, a wire, a loose antenna. Nothing is small at 10,000 meters, he reminded himself. He decided on a bold move. "Keat, switch the radios to low-power transmission. With less output, maybe fewer reflections, more stability." They tried. The signal returned faint but usable. Through static, fragments emerged. "Flight. Asia. Heading. Stormfront." Kai seized the mic. "This is Sky Asia 217. We've lost main comms. Request urgent guidance." The reply was broken, but key words carried: turn, northeast, avoid, cumulonimbus. "They want us to turn northeast to avoid the storm cell," Keat shouted. Kai banked right 30 degrees. The jet shook violently. Passengers screamed, but gradually the radar confirmed. They had bypassed the worst. Relief washed over the cockpit. Keat wiped his brow, but Kai stayed tense. The antenna problem remained. 3 more hours to Tokyo without stable comms was still a grave risk. He made a daring call. "We'll descend. Lower altitude may stabilize signal. But fuel will burn faster, and the storm is worse below," Keat protested. "Without comms, we're blind. Communication is safety." The plane dropped to 28,000 feet. Passengers felt their ears pop. Turbulence eased slightly. Lan reassured them. "The aircraft is adjusting altitude for more stability. Please remain calm." Suddenly, the VHF flickered fair. For the first time in the storm, a usable link appeared. They could talk again, barely, but enough. Kai exhaled relief, though unease gnawed. If the antenna fails further, silence returns. On the ground, Tokyo ATC staff monitored the flickering signal. A communications engineer remarked, "Their antenna's failing. If this continues, prepare emergency diversion." Above the dark sea, Sky Asia 217 pressed on, 180 lives suspended by a handful of failing screws. The roar of engines, rain hammering glass, thunder rumbling. Nothing else. Kai stared at the radar, knowing they weren't safe yet. Hundreds of miles of storm still ahead. One more crack in the antenna, and all hope would vanish. "Captain, what if the main antenna fastener snaps completely?" Keat asked hoarsely. Kai's reply was blunt. "Then we're left with a backup weak and short range, meaning no effective comms, and then..." He gripped the yoke tighter. "We'll have to fly on instinct." The words chilled Keat. He knew Captain Kai's reputation for crisis mastery, but never imagined their fate would rest on one antenna screw. The plane pushed north, buffeted by crosswinds. In the cabin, exhaustion replaced panic. Some passengers prayed, some clutched armrests. A child slept in its mother's arms despite the storm. Lon entered the cockpit. Pale but composed, she reported. "Captain, passengers are panicking. They keep asking when we'll land." "What should I tell them?" Kai met her eyes, firm. "Tell them we are in control. We will bring them to safety." As she turned, she overheard Kai whisper to Keat. "Fuel only 4.5 hours. If comms cut again, we may divert to Okinawa." Lan's heart pounded. She closed the door quietly, hiding the truth from the cabin. Suddenly, the screen flashed. "Antenna failure imminent." "Captain, VSWR critical. The main antenna is almost gone," Keat cried. "Switch to backup. Hold altitude steady," Kai commanded. A thin signal remained. Through static, they caught fragments. "Sky Asia, divert, Naha, runway available." "They want us to divert to Naha, Okinawa," Kiet shouted. "Understood," Kai barked. He swung the jet eastward. It was survival. Abandon Tokyo, aim for Okinawa. A good captain doesn't cling to destination. He saves lives. The jet lurched, passengers screamed, but leveled. Kai transmitted one last message. "Sky Asia 217, diverting Naha, emergency. Prepare reception." The signal died, but the message was delivered, 1 hour to Naha. With no further guidance, they flew on radar, experience, and instinct. Storms battered them, but Kai kept altitude steady. Keat optimized power, shutting non-essential loads to feed the backup antenna. He thought of the saying, "Never underestimate oxidation." Now he saw why. Lan informed passengers, "Due to adverse weather, we will land in Okinawa. This is for safety. Please stay calm." Fear mixed with relief. They would land soon. At last, Okinawa's lights appeared. Warmth spread through the cabin. Kai's shoulders eased for the first time. He lowered gear, set flaps, aligned for final. Though the radios were failing, navigation systems guided them. ATC had cleared the runway. Wheels touched down with a screech, slowing to a halt. Applause, tears, embraces erupted in the cabin. Kai removed his headset, eyes damp. Keat exhaled the longest breath of his life. Lan entered, voice trembling. "Captain, we made it." Kai whispered, "Not just us, the crew, the screws, even what was left of the antenna, all together brought them home." The next day, engineers confirmed it. Fastener almost sheared, coax loose, contacts badly oxidized. Minutes from total silence, a thick report full of jargon went to the airline. But for those aboard, the real record was memory. That 180 lives had once hung on a single screw. In his logbook, Captain Kai wrote, "There is no small detail in aviation. A screw, an antenna fastener, a trace of oxidation. Each can define the line between life and death. Respect every detail. They are the soul of the sky." And so, the story of Sky Asia 217 became a reminder to all, from maintenance engineers to veteran pilots, that aviation safety does not lie in grand decisions, but in never neglecting the smallest of things. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner of Pacific Sky Airlines departed Los Angeles that night, carrying nearly 250 passengers toward Sydney. In the deep sky, the stars sparkled peacefully like an endless Milky Way. But in the cockpit, Captain Huang Lam could not relax. He had flown through dozens of storms, experienced countless emergencies, yet this time something in his instincts made him restless. "Captain, the electrical load of the communication system is rising abnormally," First Officer Dai reported, his eyes fixed on the display. "The voltage sometimes drops below the safe threshold when we increase transmission power." Lam frowned. He knew clearly. A voltage drop under load meant critical systems could become unstable. In aviation, the electronics were the lifeblood. If the power supply was compromised, navigation, communications, even flight control could be affected. Check the output from engine generator number 2, Lom ordered. Dewey moved quickly. The display showed current fluctuating wildly. The numbers spiked and then plunged to the bottom. Clearly, the generator was in trouble. Meanwhile, in the passenger cabin, everything remained calm. Passengers were watching movies, dozing off, or chatting quietly. None knew that just meters away in the cockpit, an invisible danger was building. "Captain, it could be the voltage regulator failing. When we transmit at high power, the voltage collapses," Dewey said, voice tense. "I think so too, but if it's just minor fluctuation, we can hold on," Lom replied, though his eyes betrayed his tension. He recalled last week's maintenance meeting. A young engineer had noted, "Generator number 2 vibrates slightly under high load, needs deeper inspection," but the tight flight schedule had postponed the detailed check. Lom sighed, remembering the old saying, "In aviation, the small fault today can become tomorrow's disaster." Outside, the plane glided smoothly through the night. But when Lom requested a high-power transmission test, the entire panel suddenly lit up in red, alarms shrieking. Voltage plummeted. Several subsystems flickered and rebooted. "Electrical instability," Dewey shouted. Lom immediately reduced transmission power and voltage slowly recovered. But the truth was undeniable. The system was entering a dangerous state. "We must prepare for the worst," Lom said calmly. "If the main power fails, we still have backup batteries and the APU. But in storms, engine interference will complicate everything." Dewey swallowed hard. He knew the captain never exaggerated. What he had just said meant this flight could turn into a nightmare at any moment. In the cabin, Chief Flight Attendant Mai received word from the cockpit. She rushed forward, spoke briefly with the captain. When she heard the words, "power supply," she shivered. She knew, loss of power on an aircraft meant loss of everything. "I will reassure the passengers," Mai said quietly, her eyes firm. "Captain, you and the first officer must do everything to keep us safe." Lom nodded, feeling the solidarity of those carrying 250 lives on their shoulders. The aircraft pressed on. But in the cockpit, each second grew heavier. Voltage readings danced erratically. Every red line swing made the pilots grip their seats harder. Outside, the sky was serene, but within them, an invisible storm had begun. And this was only the beginning. The Boeing 787 still raced through the dark, but the atmosphere in the cockpit grew heavier. Captain Huang Lam studied the panels, voltage readings unstable like a faltering heartbeat. At times, steady at 115 V, seconds later plunging to 92 V, a dangerous level that could abruptly shut down key systems. "Captain, I hear a strange humming from engine number 2, Dewey said. "The generator on that engine might be vibrating and causing interference." Indeed, the background hum in the cockpit thickened, laced with faint static. Liam tilted his head, listening. His seasoned ears picked out anomalies easily. This time, he was certain. Electromagnetic interference was radiating from the engine generator. "If the interference spreads to communications, we may lose contact completely," Dai warned, eyes wide. "Not just communications," Lam replied. "The fly-by-wire control also depends on clean power. If interference is too strong, the computers could freeze or respond slowly." At that instant, alarms blared. The display flashed "COM failure," blinking repeatedly. VHF radio became shrieking static. ATC voices vanished. "Lost contact!" Dai shouted. Lam switched to HF backup. Worse still, the interference filled the channel, endless buzzing like a swarm of giant bees. They could hear nothing from the ground. In the cabin, Mai caught the static from the intercom, immediately realizing something was wrong. She hurried to the cockpit. Lam gave her a brief nod, a silent signal. "It's serious." Without a word, she turned back to calm the passengers, though her heart pounded. Outside, weather worsened. A thundercloud towered ahead nearly 40,000 feet. Radar glowed red, signaling danger. Normally, they'd request clearance to detour from ATC, but now, cut off from contact, they had to decide alone. "We must choose our own path," Lum said gravely. "Turn 15 degrees south. Avoid the red zone." Dewey complied. The Boeing banked, wind whistling against the fuselage. Passengers felt the sudden maneuver, some startled, whispering anxiously. Mai announced over PA, "Ladies and gentlemen, the pilots are adjusting our path to avoid bad weather. Please remain calm and keep seatbelts fastened." In the cockpit, stress escalated. Interference not only disrupted communication but flickered flight displays. The electrical bus isolation light glowed, meaning the system was isolating itself to prevent cascading failures. "If the main bus cuts off, we'll lose multiple systems," Dewey worried. "Prepare to start the APU for backup power," Lom ordered firmly. Dewey engaged the APU. A low rumble rose from the aircraft's tail. Moments later, voltage steadied at 110 V, but the panel also read Gen 2 offline. Generator number 2 had shut down. Lom frowned. Now all loads relied on generator number 1 and the APU. One more fault, and the massive jet would face a true emergency. "We must conserve power," Lom said. "Shut down all non-essential systems. Keep only comms, controls, weather radar, and minimum equipment." Dai complied. The cabin dimmed. In-flight entertainment shut off. Passengers murmured nervously, but Mai reassured them. "This is only a technical adjustment. Please rest assured the flight remains safe." Yet inside, she knew it was far from just a technical adjustment. Her duty was to prevent panic. Through the windshield, lightning ripped across dark clouds, a sky filled with electrical charge where interference thrived. Lom gripped the yoke, as if taming a wounded giant through the storm. Suddenly, a new alert. Comm backup failed. "Even the backup comms are dead," Dewey gasped. For a moment, silence fell between them. In the vast sky, the Boeing was utterly alone. "Captain, what do we do now?" Dewey whispered. Lom inhaled deeply, then replied, "We fly on skill. Radar still works, APU still powers us. We will find our way and land at the nearest possible field." He knew many pilots in history had faced total radio silence. The key was not despair, but steady calculation. An hour passed, tension like a taut wire. Interference buzzed through the cabin speakers, unnerving passengers. Mai walked the aisle, smiling faintly, calming one after another, though inside she prayed the power would last. In the cockpit, Lom and Dewey worked in sync. They picked routes around storm cells, conserving fuel while holding altitude. Every decision of Lom was sharp, forged from decades of experience. Dewey felt confidence slowly spread to him, like a hidden flame. "Captain, if things get worse, where will we land?" Dewey asked. "Honolulu," Lom answered without hesitation. "The detour still allows us to reach Hawaii, not our original destination, but the safest choice." Relief washed over Dewey. As long as there was a backup landing field, hope lived. But just as they thought stability returned, voltage surged wildly again. The APU temperature spiked, nearing overload. Sweat rolled down Dewey's forehead. If the APU failed, they would plunge into crisis. Lom's grip tightened, determination in his eyes. "We cannot let it overload. We must shed more load now." The real battle with the power supply was just beginning. The fate of 250 people still hung between life and death in the dark Pacific night. The cockpit was suffocating. The APU overheat light flashed, alarm wailing. Dewey paled, voice cracking. "Captain, the APU is overloading. If we don't act, it will shut down." Lom's eyes sharpened. If the APU quit, only generator number 1 remained, and one more fault would plunge the Dreamliner into darkness over the Pacific. "Shed load now," he ordered. Dewey quickly switched off auxiliary lights, reduced air conditioning, killed passenger entertainment. In the cabin, screens went black, lights dimmed. Murmurs rose, prayers whispered. Chief Attendant Mai rushed to the cockpit. "Captain, what's happening?" "APU overload." "We're reducing load," Lom answered curtly. "Tell the passengers it's a technical measure. Do not let panic spread." Mai nodded. She announced calmly, "To optimize power. Lighting and entertainment will temporarily be disabled. This is a calculated safety measure. Please, remain calm. Though soothing, passengers' anxious eyes betrayed their fear. A child asked, "Mom, why did the TVs turn off?" The mother forced a smile. "Just saving power, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." In the cockpit, voltage steadied, APU cooled, warning lights dimmed. But Lam knew it was fragile as a thread. He pointed at the map. 2 more hours to Honolulu. But I doubt the APU will hold. Captain, if we descend, engines ease load, generator number 1 may stabilize, Dewey suggested. Good idea, Lam nodded. Prepare to descend to 28,000 feet. The plane eased lower, clouds thick but less lightning. Radar showed a calmer corridor. Both pilots breathed easier, though remained vigilant. An hour later, Honolulu's lights appeared. Yet the final trial began. APU warnings flared again. Generator number 1 voltage dipped. "We cannot lose power during approach," Lam said, voice taut. "If we do, no autopilot." He made a daring choice. "Shut down comms entirely. We don't need them now. Every watt goes to controls and radar." Dewey hesitated, then obeyed. The plane fell into radio silence, a lone bird steering itself through the night. In the cabin, Mai readied passengers for the worst. Belts tight, masks ready. An elderly woman grabbed her hand, trembling. "Child, will we be all right?" Mai clasped her hand. "Yes, we will. The captain is the best pilot I've ever known." Her words were as much for herself as for the passengers. At last, the Boeing approached Honolulu's runway, bright lights like saving beacons. Lam focused, eyes locked. "Gear down," he commanded. The landing gear extended with mechanical groans. Voltage flickered but held. The jet descended, touched down with a screech, sparks spraying. The cabin shook violently. Passengers screamed, then the speed slowed, until finally the plane stopped. In the cockpit, the two pilots slumped back, drenched in sweat, their eyes full of exhausted relief. In the cabin, applause erupted, mingled with tears and embraces. They had survived a flight of death. The next day, engineers confirmed. Generator number 2 destroyed, coils emitting interference, voltage collapsing across systems. The faulty regulator worsened it. Without the APU carrying the burden, the aircraft would have lost all power mid-air. The incident report spanned dozens of pages. But what remained most vivid was the memory of those who had faced the brink. Captain Hoang Lam wrote in his journal, "Power is the heart of an aircraft. It may be taken for granted, but when that heart falters, the steel giant trembles before the storm. Last night, we survived through crew resilience, through skill, and through decisions none dared take lightly." The greatest lesson: no abnormal sign must ever be ignored. Thus, Pacific Sky's flight became a story remembered across aviation. A stark reminder that voltage drops and engine interference are not just lines in maintenance logs, but the razor's edge between life and death. The Airbus A350 of Oceanic Air departed Seoul Airport under a blazing red sunset, bound for Los Angeles. At 36,000 feet, the sky turned deep purple, thin layers of clouds stretched out like silk. In the cockpit, Captain Ngok Min and First Officer Huang An monitored the instruments. The 11-hour flight across the vast Pacific demanded absolute concentration. At first, everything went smoothly. VHF communication was clear while leaving South Korean airspace, then switched to HF to maintain contact across the ocean. But just a few hours later, An frowned. "Captain, the HF signal is drifting. It sounds like frequency offset." Min turned the tuning knob. The transmission was still there, but the controller's voice came muffled, distant, mixed with static. Each adjustment slipped away, as if the receiver could no longer lock precisely onto the center frequency. "Could be oscillator instability," Min muttered. "If the synthesizer malfunctions, the frequency will drift gradually." And checked the diagnostics. Freq stability showed plus 150 Hz, 3 times the allowed limit. That meant the aircraft and ATC were speaking on different frequencies, causing distorted communication. In the cabin, passengers were carefree, watching movies, eating, drinking. No one knew that at that very moment the A350's electronic ears were beginning to betray it. Captain, if we lose comms, entering the FIR over the ocean will be extremely dangerous, Anne said tensely. I know, Min sighed. HF is our only lifeline to the ground. If it goes, we are blind. He recalled the pre-flight maintenance meeting. An engineer had noted HF synthesizer shows instability at high temperature, needs further inspection. But the tight schedule had pushed it aside, and now it returned as a ghost, haunting the flight. Min keyed the mic. This is Oceanic Air 317, checking comms on 8903 kHz. The speaker responded with static, then a faint broken voice. 317. Unreadable. Repeat. Anne gripped the mic, tried retuning, but the controller's voice still drowned in noise. The signal slipped away each time they nearly caught it. The synthesizer is drifting, Min confirmed, and we've only covered 1/3 of the journey. In the cabin, Chief Attendant Thu Ha was informed of unstable comms. She looked around at the carefree passengers, then chose silence to avoid panic. But in her heart, she sensed something was wrong. In the cockpit, tension strung tight. Min and Anne took turns turning the knob, adjusting by tiny hertz, trying to cling to the controller's voice, but the phase error grew. It was as if an invisible hand twisted the frequency dial, pulling them away from the world. Captain, if this continues, we'll need another backup link, Anne said firmly. Satcom? Min asked. Yes, but it's not always stable and very costly. Worse, solar storms can affect satellites too. Min nodded. He knew they were entering a long battle, fighting with invisible numbers with drifting hearts across the sea of waves. And he also knew a small deviation could cast 300 lives into isolation over the Pacific. This was only the beginning of the tragedy called frequency drift. In the cockpit, pale green glow from screens reflected the tense faces of Captain Ngok Min and First Officer Huang An. HF signals kept drifting, like a slackening violin string. The controller's voice became warped sounds, sometimes booming, sometimes fading, like echoes from a deep well. Captain, offset is now plus 400 Hz, Anne reported. The synthesizer is definitely unstable. Min nodded slightly. He knew the cause. Thermal drift. Flying long hours with changing temperatures, freezing, 50-degree C air outside, heat building in the cabin, stressed oscillator components, stretching and shrinking, sending frequencies astray. Let's switch channels, Min ordered, and tried 113.288 kHz, an oceanic backup. At first it was clear, then it too slipped away. Like trying to converse on a phone line where both ends keep changing numbers. In the cabin, some passengers noticed flickering lights. Curious questions came, but Thu Ha only smiled. Just routine technical adjustments. Inside, waves of worry rose. She knew too well, when the cockpit grew silent, things were far from routine. Outside, towering thunderclouds loomed, lightning slicing like blades. Radar flashed red. Normally, they'd request ATC vectors. But now, HF was nearly useless. Captain, if we don't turn, we'll fly straight into cumulonimbus, Anne warned. We must decide ourselves. Min's voice was low. He used radar to estimate, choosing a detour south. The Airbus banked, shuddering in strong winds. Passengers screamed, some vomiting from the sudden jolt. Thu Ha's calm voice over PA. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened. We are avoiding weather. Stay calm. The familiar phrase, heard countless times, now carried hidden tremor. In the cockpit, matters worsened. The synthesizer not only drifted, but added phase noise. ATC voices warped into ghostly whispers. And tried filters, but only shattered the sound further. Captain, we can't sustain comms for the whole flight, Anne said hoarsely. Min was silent a moment, then decided, activate SATCOM. We'll try satellite. Anne complied, but the display flashed. Signal unstable, atmospheric interference. Solar activity degraded the satellite link. Once again, they were cornered. For a moment, Min felt the world shrink to only them two, the chief attendant, and 300 unaware passengers, cut adrift from Earth. Time crawled. They scanned HF bands endlessly, each drifting away. Thermal drift grew stronger, swallowing hearts like an invisible beast. Suddenly, Anne cried out, "Captain, GNSS signals are unstable. GPS flickers." Min frowned. The synthesizer's interference not only crippled comms, but disrupted GNSS receivers too. Position on screen jumped by nautical miles. Over the Pacific, such errors could be fatal. "Stay calm," Min gripped the yoke. "We still have INS. It doesn't need radio, only inertia." But he knew INS errors accumulate with time. Without GPS updates, accuracy would degrade. In the cabin, lightning flared outside. Passengers screamed, children cried. Thu Ha ran the aisles, forcing calm smiles though her legs shook. Up front, Min glanced at Anne's eyes, fear mixed with resolve. He remembered flight school. A good pilot is not one who avoids problems, but one who stands firm when all turns against him. "Anne, prepare our last method," Min said. "If drift continues, we'll use manual netting, constant hand tuning to cling to signals, even fleetingly." Anne nodded. Primitive, but better than nothing. Ahead, black clouds churned like beasts. Thunder roared, an electromagnetic battlefield. And within it, the Airbus was but a grain of sand, its electronic ears going deaf in the storm of waves. Static mocked them in the speakers. The signal slipped away, then vanished. "Captain, we've lost comms completely," Anne gasped. Min said nothing. He stared into the storm, hands firm on the yoke. One thought filled him. We cannot yield. We must bring them home, whatever it takes. The cockpit lay in silence. Only shattered static filled the headsets, and twisted knobs frantically, to no avail. Frequency drift exceeded 700 hertz, turning voices into chaos. "Captain, we can't go on like this." Anne's voice shook. "Steady." Min placed a hand on his shoulder, calm. "There's still a way." He recalled advanced training, when instructors taught manual netting, hand-tuning every moment to chase the signal, like steering a car on ice. No one imagined needing it in the modern age. Yet here, over the Pacific, it was their last key. "Anne, hold HF, twist the knob continuously. I'll send brief words only. Position reports. Altitudes. We don't need full sentences, just the essentials," Min commanded. And nodded, hand trembling over the dial. Each time the static dipped, Min shouted, "Oceanic Air 317, position report, FL 360. The reply broke through briefly. "Roger. Maintain. Avoid storm." Both pilots locked eyes. Imperfect, but enough. They got the message. Avoid storm, maintain altitude. In the cabin, Thu Ha noticed passengers tense. Lights flickered, intercom crackled. She smiled, walking the aisle. "Just weak signals, like a phone in bad reception. Everything will be fine." Her words calmed some, though she knew the truth. They were walking a tightrope between safety and disaster. In the cockpit, drift worsened as cold air deepened, and twisted constantly, each millimeter meaning the difference between silence and a faint voice. Suddenly, the controller's voice pierced clearer. "Oceanic 317, reroute. East, 20 degrees. Turbulence ahead." "They want us east 20 degrees, Anne shouted. Min banked instantly. The Airbus lurched. Passengers screamed. But radar confirmed. They dodged a massive storm cell. "Well done, Anne," Min smiled faintly. "We caught it just in time." Hours dragged. At last, faint lights of America shimmered ahead, like lighthouses across the ocean. "Captain, we're nearing VHF range," Anne said. Switching, they heard crystal clear. "Oceanic Air 317. This is Los Angeles Control. Radar contact. Descend FL 240. The voice was heavenly music. Min keyed. "Roger, descend FL 240. Oceanic 317. In the cabin, Thu Ha announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now in contact with Los Angeles ATC. Prepare for landing." Applause erupted, Tears flowed. The A350 descended, touched down at LAX with a long screech. Passengers cheered, overwhelmed. In the cockpit, Min and Anne leaned back, drenched in sweat, smiling. They had carried 300 souls through storms and an invisible enemy called frequency drift. The next day, engineers found the HF synthesizer degraded, oscillator components aged, unstable under temperature swings. Reports with dense technical terms went to the Aviation Authority. But for the Oceanic 317 crew, the real report lay in the lesson. No abnormality must ever be ignored. Min wrote in his logbook, "Last night, we fought not the storm, but invisible Huss. A drifting synthesizer can turn the ocean into a prison. A pilot must learn to listen to even the smallest things, for they decide the fate of hundreds." The night over the southern coast of Japan was as dark as ink, with scattered harbor lights flickering faintly through the drizzle. The Airbus A321neo of Hai-Van Airlines, flight HV327, had just departed Okinawa bound for Da Nang. In the cockpit, Captain Tran Bao and First Officer Lei Kong silently watched the weather radar. Low, humid clouds, shifting monsoon winds, pressure rising and falling with the rhythm of a restless night. Everything remained within safe limits, but Bao, with 2 decades of flying, felt an itch under his skin, the vague premonition of details overlooked. "Kong, let's test the VHF link again," Bao said, voice calm yet firm. "Switch to the backup channel. Test with Okinawa control before we hand off to Fukuoka." The first officer nodded, turned the dial, transmitted a test packet. The sound in their headsets resembled rain falling on a tin roof, slightly crackling, slightly broken, then fading. The conversation was still intelligible, but something was off. The ground voice slipped faintly, like a microphone with a pulled cord. "Could be the humidity," Kong guessed. "Tonight's air is thick with mist." Bao didn't reply. He recalled a faint note in last week's maintenance log. "Check VHF antenna 1 grounding. Thick paint around the base. Possible hidden corrosion underneath. Recommend sanding clean and remeasuring." A tight flight schedule had pushed that task to the next round. "Temporarily acceptable," the report read. Temporarily, in aviation, that word always cast a long shadow. The aircraft climbed through 28,000 feet. Rain slanted against the fuselage, drumming. On the display, link marginal blinked once and vanished. Bao suppressed a sigh, switched on HF as backup. Long-range waves were still clean, but the latency was large. On the busy shipping lanes below, fishing and cargo vessels occasionally spewed bursts of interference like fireflies, peppering the channels with clatter. "Do you see this?" Kong pointed at a small window. "Ant GND impedance." "Sa," Bao nodded slightly. For radios of this scale, the airframe ground plane was half the antenna's heart. If thick paint covered the joint, or corrosion gnawed beneath the alloy, RF return currents were strangled, radiation patterns distorted. The result, transmitted power poured out like water into sand, warming metal but useless. They transferred communications between ATC sectors. Each call returned a little more distant, as if someone were closing a door. In the cabin, Chief Attendant Diepon walked the aisle checking seatbelts. She saw a boy of about 7 press his forehead to the window, drawing circles in the fog with his breath, then smiling. The sight softened her heart. She couldn't hear the cockpit's numbers, but she could read the silence of the sky. At the first waypoint, Kong called ATC to report position. This time, the reply came fragmented, as though through a concrete wall. Bao requested a repeat. Only hiss returned. He frowned, switched to VHF antenna 2. Reception improved slightly, then degraded again when the aircraft banked around a growler cloud. "Not the storm," Bao said. "It's grounding. When the plane banks, the RF line of sight shifts. The reflective plane unbalances. If the antenna base is sealed by paint, impedance jumps." Kong glanced at the checklist. Grounding. Airframe. Bonding test. Scheduled next C-check. The words lay quiet like thin ice. Bao signaled to switch to COM-3 backup, then activated ACARS. HV3T7 experiencing intermittent VHF performance. Suspect antenna grounding. Request relay via ATC when possible. The message left slowly. Reply slower still. Entering the next FIR, they were assigned to hold altitude and await vectors. But the vector lay at the end of a fraying string. Static hissed higher, like a flame licking paper's edge. Outside, the sky opened into deep ink. In the cabin, and pulled a curtain for a pregnant passenger dozing. The gentle vibration felt like a cat pawing a ball of yarn. People believed the flight was calm. Bao knew. Calm was sometimes just a raincoat thrown over a storm. Suddenly, VHF-1TX fail, VSWR high, lit. Kong lowered transmit power. Reflections dropped but voices faded. Bao weighed. Shout strong but mute, or whisper weak but audible. He chose audible. The sky was wide, the flight long. What they needed was a thread, however thin. Kong. Log it. Suspected poor grounding from paint and corrosion. Record symptoms, time, effects, mitigations. If we must divert for comms, the report must hold. Copy. Ahead, the coastline disappeared. Beneath them was only black upon black. Weather radar painted surface clutter. Perhaps birds, perhaps ships. But what concerned Bao were the dotted tracks of other aircraft. They weren't alone. No one wished to be a ghost shadow colliding with another light because of a missing metal contact the size of a fingernail. In taut silence, HV-327 pressed south. Every decision now carried a share of earth, paint layers, hidden corrosion under the antenna base, imperfect return paths. All those small things wove a great story. 15 minutes later, as HV-327 skimmed a thin stratiform cloud, VHF signals sank again. This time, not just crackle, the noise changed tone, as if someone had plugged a foreign wire into the score. Kong eyed the power panel. The left generator had shifted to high load. Cabin heat. Demand glowed. Bao frowned. Moisture could be condensing beneath the antenna base. Last year's paint formed a dielectric film. When electric fields changed, impedance shifted slightly, raising reflections. Does the interference spike match heater cycles? Bao asked. Almost exact. Each time load rises, static thickens. In the schematics, COM grounding leads return to the E&E bay bus. If one bond was oxidized, contact resistance rose. RF return currents avoided the path, crawling along wing spars to other joints. Longer, distorted. Loops generated broadband noise. Result: half their words fell between cracks. Bao tested on the spot. Switched QM2 to antenna 2, lowered transmit power, then shed non-essential heavy loads sequentially. Kong logged combinations like a chemist recording trials. Static decreased, but signals still wavered like a bulb on a string. If it's a loose bonding strap, we can't fix it midair, Kong said. I could retune by geometry, change bank, change altitude, only temporary. Enough to keep a thread, Bao answered. Request clear vectors from Fukuoka. If not, use HF SATCOM relay. They banked a few degrees left. Strangely, quality jumped to fair. Perhaps in that attitude, the airframe opened a better reflective plane. Bao quickly transmitted position, requested optimal altitude, weather deviation. The reply crept through like a thread through a crack. HV-327, Roger. Maintain FL-340. Proceed direct Igari. Then voices melted into rain. It works, Kong exhaled. But not stable. A shift ruins it. Bao pointed to the bond resistance trend graph. The curve creeping upward from last inspection, slow as grass. Corrosion was patient. 1/2 mil of extra paint, a pinhead of rust, and someday, a story. The aircraft entered heavy traffic. TCAS painted diamonds all around. Bao knew, miss one vector because of garbled comms, and they'd become probability. He asked Kong to start recording calls. So every say again, bore evidence of poor link quality. Suddenly, COM1TX fail, VSWR high, flashed, then cleared. The system auto-shut to protect final amplifiers. Bao bit his lip. Iron rule. Protect equipment rather than shout into void. Prioritize COM2. Keep COM1 receive, Bao ordered. Prepare Manila diversion if quality dips below minimum. Kong pulled charts, messaged OCC via ACARS. Data still moved, characters less sensitive than voice. Reply arrived. OCC notified Manila and Da Nang. Weather good. Maintain course if comms suffice. Otherwise divert Manila. At the bottom, after landing, sand paint, treat corrosion. Measure bonding, 2.5 measures. See, Bao murmured, we're walking the path of rust grains. Rain eased. The sky unwrapped black velvet. Kong adjusted speed slightly, shifting fuselage resonance. For 3 minutes, quality leapt to good, enough to request vectors, confirm clear corridor, update ETA. When the gift ended, static resumed its vigil. They say the antenna is the ear, Kong said quietly, but I think grounding is the heart. No matter how sharp the ear, if the heart won't pump, nothing is heard. Bao smiled. He thought of the boy at the window, the pregnant woman asleep, the old lady with her blanket. Those lives now rested on thin strips of metal, bound by bolts and straps. The world's fragility sometimes measured in millions. Fukuoka handed HV-327 to Ho Chi Minh Control. A critical link. If it snapped, they'd be a ship losing its lighthouse. Bao asked Kong to hold the sweet attitude and speed that improved reflection. The small miracle repeated. Signals rose just enough to hear, clear direct bunta, continue level. Let's go, Bao whispered, afraid to wake the luck. Don't change anything unnecessary. They clung to unnecessary. Below, the S-shaped coast slept in sea haze. Above, paint and rust still lurked under the antenna base, waiting for sandpaper, solvent, a wrench of proper torque. But tonight, they would not win. And then, as stories never end, new clouds emerged. There, what they needed most was not engine power, but a clean enough surface for return currents to find their way home. Dawn spread pale over the South China Sea. In the cockpit, Bao told Kong to keep the exact attitude proven best. Speed, trim, bank. VHF cleared just enough for Ho Chi Minh Control. HV-327. Radar contact, descend FL-220. Roger, Bao answered, then static returned. But it sufficed for the first rung. In the cabin, Deepan prepared for landing, reminding passengers to fasten belts. The boy at the window whispered that the sun was rising from the sea, and her smile calmed the row. Optimize power to antenna, Bao said. Cut loads during transmit, restore when listening. ALC is already sluggish, Kong replied. The coastal city appeared, glowing like a map. Direct approach cleared. At tower handoff, signals stuttered. Bao gestured to hold attitude. Tower voice broke clear once. Cleared ILS 35L, wind EO206, report established. Bao seized it, confirmed established, locked on localizer. The needle centered. Flaps 1, flaps 2. Gear down, Kong called. At 2,000 feet, crackle returned, but ILS held. Poppy lights, red-white, runway markings swelling. Bow eased, landing firm. Spoilers popped, reversers roared, HV-327 rolled to a stop. Scattered applause broke out, thin with relief. In maintenance hangar, engineers opened VHF-1 base. Paint overlapped the contact edge, beneath it white powder corrosion. Bonding strap tarnished, measured 3.1 mm, spec 2.5. For RF, a few milliams is a wall, Chief Engineer Lin said. Procedure, mask, sand paint, clean oxide, replace strap, apply conductive compound, torque correctly, remeasure. New reading, 1.8 mm. VHF2 cleaned as well, then loop tested with handheld network analyzer. Reflection plots neat, distortions gone. Last night each bank angle shifted field geometry. Waves took detours, Lin explained. Holding a fixed attitude to catch the channel was a proper stopgap. But flight should not rely on miracles. Bao laughed wearily. So we repay with sandpaper and a 4-wire ohmmeter. That afternoon, the final report read, root cause: poor grounding from paint intrusion and corrosion under antenna base. Bonding resistance exceeded limit. Return loop formed with load shifts. Effects: high VSWR, reduced effective power. VHF degraded with attitude and electrical load. In-flight mitigation: lowered transmit power, optimized attitude, used ACARS relay, maintained minimal comms. Repair: sand paint, treat oxide, replace strap, apply conductive compound, verify compliance. Recommendation: update paint masking procedure near bonding areas, increase ground resistance checks in marine environments. Sunset dyed the tail red as the aircraft was towed out. Diep Ann brought coffee to the cockpit. All done? She asked. Done, Bao replied. Tonight, our ears will hear clear again? Kong eyed the straight white runway. I still remember clinging to the lucky posture. The world felt fragile then. The world is always fragile, Bao said. And because it's fragile, we must be meticulous. A loose bolt, a smear of paint, a million rise, each could become a story. Our job is to write the opposite story: tighten, sand, measure, then listen. Wind hummed along the fin. Somewhere, another jet departed, leaving a thin contrail. HV-327 stood silent, but ready, its ground bonds polished like mirrors. When its wheels left the ground that night, the thread between them and Earth would not be as fragile as the night before. During disassembly, Lin showed Bao microscope shots, tiny islands of paint wedged between metal and base, like frozen bubbles. They break the effective surface, Lin said, forcing return currents across narrow bridges. A young engineer presented a new strap, finely braided, tin-coated against corrosion. They torqued, logged, stamped materials, weather, completion hour, small details, yet these kept the aircraft faithful to the sky. Finally, they clipped the auxiliary ground lead to the analyzer, simulated loads. The amplitude phase graph was flat as taut paper. That's enough, Lin said, patting the antenna base like a carpenter tapping polished wood. That night, during ramp comms check, ATC's call rang so clear everyone paused to listen. A normal sound, yet the greatest reward. The boy from yesterday boarded the next flight, again pressed his forehead to the glass. Uncle, can the plane hear better now? Bao smiled. As clear as waves, son, as clear as freshly polished metal. And the Airbus rolled out, turned into the wind. Ground straps hugged the fuselage, antenna bases touched metal like hands on a heart. At the surge of engines, the sky spoke back in a voice no longer scarred. Go. The evening on the Tibetan plateau was cold, dry, and dark blue like a pane of tinted glass. The Boeing 737 MAX of Liana Airlines, flight number LA457, was cutting past the edge of the clouds, heading southeast toward Kunming. Below, mountains layered like rolling waves. Ahead, a weak convection band was growing, as though someone was inflating a balloon of rain. In the cockpit, Captain Wu Hao, a man in his 40s with a deep laugh, checked the route once more. On his right, First Officer Tri Dung meticulously reviewed the radios section. VHF-1, VHF-2, backup HF, SATCOM, sitting in the corner of the display like a white lifebuoy. Loss control is a bit heavy with static, Dung frowned, turning the squelch knob. The background sound became less scratchy, the Indo-Tibetan controller's bilingual voice blending like a stream. But still okay, understandable? Hao nodded, switched to the next channel to request handover. The reply came, then suddenly cut off as though blocked by an invisible wall. Hao looked outside. The left wing was dipping slightly, the plane banking about 15 degrees to avoid a shear. In that instant, the signal vanished entirely. When he leveled again, the voice reappeared, thin as a strand of silk. Strange, Dung muttered. Just when it hums, it dies. Tilt a little and it's like hitting a closed door. Hao didn't reply immediately. He remembered a training session with flight engineers in the hangar. A slide showed the aircraft body like a block of stone, and VHF waves as tiny arrows. The RF line of sight gets blocked by the wing and fuselage, the instructor said, especially with antennas mounted under the belly, near the gear strut or wing fairing. At large bank angles, the aircraft itself becomes a mountain. Back then, Hao nodded, just to acknowledge. Now, the old lesson rose up like the shadow of the aircraft itself. Try COM 2, Hao said. Antenna 2 is in the nose, its shadow angle might differ. Dung snapped his fingers and switched to VHF 2. As expected, the quality improved, though not steadily. Each time they slipped past a patch of cloud and the aircraft banked, the 35-meter wing suddenly became a cliff blocking the invisible road to the ground station. When the plane leveled again, the door opened and the voice poured back in. Not weather interference, Dung said, less doubtful now, more certain. It's the shadow of the wing body itself. The belly antenna is being blocked by the wing body fairing to the northeast. Hao nodded. Log it temporarily. RF shadowing at high bank angles. On nights flying over stair-stepped fires like this, every few minutes there's another vector, another heading change, and each bank makes us into a mountain. Below, in the cabin, Chief Flight Attendant Lan Chi walked back and forth. She noticed a few Chinese passengers murmuring about the bright clouds ahead, like shattered glass. At row 18, an old man held a brass compass, a rare keepsake, close to the window, guessing directions. Children drew circles on the glass with their breath. Faint rings like tiny radar screens. A TCS TA alert beeped. An A320 approaching from the south, 2,000 feet higher, would cross ahead at a safe distance, but enough for controllers to want both aircraft to speak clearly. Dung pressed PTT. Lhasa Control, Lien, A457, maintaining 360, request slight right to avoid buildups. 2 seconds of silence. Then the controller's voice cracked. 457. Roger. Right 10. Report clear of weather. The last words burst like bubbles. Hao nudged the yoke. The plane banked right, the left wing casting a thick shadow across the sky. Instantly, the voice cut off. He rolled back, keeping the bank under 10 degrees. The signal returned, faint but alive. We're forcing ourselves to fly on the radio, Hao said softly. Keep the bank shallow to hold the thread. If we enter a zone requiring sharp turns, the thread will snap. They tried a trick. During times they needed to receive instructions, they limited bank, accepting a wider curve. When sharp turns were necessary to dodge clouds, they switched to HF or asked another aircraft to relay temporarily. Dung sent an ACARS message to OCC. Intermittent VHF due to airframe shadowing at banks 15 degrees. Managing with low bank technique and peer relay. Monitoring. The message went quickly. The reply came. Noted. Traffic moderate. You may request relay via call sign Dragon 82 at your 2 o'clock, FL 380. We've got company, Dung smiled. The Dragon at 2 o'clock will be our radio tower. Good, Hao replied, eyes never leaving the imagined localizer needle in his mind. Tonight, the wing as long as a sword both shields us from the clouds and cuts us off from the ground. Everything has two sides. The wind shifted, the clouds shifted. They weaved like eels in mud. Shallow banks kept the signal alive. Steep banks cut it, but relay saved them. Each time the channel opened, they gulped down the next vector like a traveler drinking from a tiny stream. Lan Chi received word from the cockpit. Keep the cabin quiet. Minimize unnecessary interphone calls. She hushed whispers, dimmed the cabin lights to warm hues. Peace could be technique or art. A hot cup of tea, a neatly folded blanket, a smile with weight. Hao breathed evenly. He recognized the rhythm of shadowing. Each time the left wing blocked northeast, where the ground station sat, the signal shut. If turning south, the right wing did the same. On the invisible RF map, the aircraft was an island with cliffs. To hear the lighthouse, they had to keep the sandy shore pointed toward the light. We'll fly like sailors, Hao said. Always keep the sandy nose toward the lamp. Dung chuckled. Outside, the clouds were dark, but inside, their minds were lit. That's how cockpits survived the night. 2 hours later, as LA-457 left the misty rim of the Himalayas, the weather radar lit up a strong convection cell ahead. Control reported local showers below, but the main airway remained open. The problem wasn't the sky, it was themselves, the wings wanting to close their ears each time they needed to listen. Cell ahead tops at 38,000, Dung pointed. If we keep bank shallow, the detour will be wide, fuel costly. If we bank steep, we lose comms during handover. Take the middle road, Hao decided. Ask Dragon 82 to stand ready for relay. When we must bank steep, they'll speak for us to the ground. Otherwise, keep bank under 12 degrees. Dung called. Dragon 82, this is Lian of 457. Request relay with Kunming control when instructed. The colleague's voice was simple. Roger, we've got your back. They approached the cell. Lightning zigzagged into the cloud belly, a roar like dragging chairs on stone. Hao banked 11 degrees, then 13, tracing a wide arc like a compass stroke. VHF flickered but held. When sudden shear forced 18 degrees, all ground voices snapped off like a switch. Dragon 82, relay for LA-457. Request right 20 to avoid buildup, Dung said. Within seconds, Dragon 82 returned. Kunming approves right 20. Maintain FL-360. Saved, Dung chuckled softly. In mid-cabin, Lan Chi peeked through the service window. Lightning reflected in silent streaks on the aluminum skin. She recalled a story of a painter who coated antennas with layers too thick. If it's too glossy, the plane's ears will be dull, he said. Beauty has a limit. She touched her cup of hot water, the rim thick enough to hold heat, thin enough not to burn. The world was an art of thickness. In the cockpit, Hao and Dung began playing music with the fuselage, calculating the relative positions of belly antenna, left wing, right wing to the ground station. When the station was to the right, they avoided right banks. When to the left, avoided left banks. Small corrections. 10 degrees instead of 15, 5 seconds instead of 2. Here, each degree was an inch of wave. How? Dung asked. If we must circle in terrain steep banks, we'll be deaf again. Then we choose straight-in approaches with ILS, VUR, if available, Hao replied. Or ask tower-to-tower relays via other planes. If forced to circle, we pre-plan listening slots. Keep some straight legs with shallow banks to catch instructions. Not elegant, but safe. Kunming Control handed them a new frequency. At that moment, Dragon 82 reported, "We're leaving for a different airway. Good luck." Allies parted ways. Hao thanked them, returned to living with the shadow. Later, the new frequency was abnormally weak. Dung checked the map. The station was behind left, while they banked right 16 degrees to dodge rain. The right wing stretched across between antenna and station like a sliding door. Dung quickly switched to VHF-2, nose antenna, then rolled back to 10 degrees. The signal flared a second, enough to hear descend in 5 minutes. Dung noted, 5 minutes to descend. Hao nodded. A strand of thread had saved a staircase. Maybe we should standardize this signal-keeping technique for the fleet, Dung said. List, avoid banking toward the station, plan listening slots, prefer nose antenna for stations ahead, belly for behind, use relays when doors close. Yes, Hao replied, eyes fixed on the horizon. And one more, if anyone asks why so fussy, tell them that on some nights, a single degree of bank is a call answered. Time moved gently. They left mountains, met plains. Control handed them to a southeast station, a spot prone to shadows during left banks. Hao held course, used rudder trim to cancel yaw instead of rolling wings. The signal came in crystal clear. They smiled together. Sometimes good flying was simply less movement, more effect. In the cabin, the old man with the brass compass asked Lan Chi, "Miss, why does the plane sometimes talk and sometimes not?" She paused, then answered in small words, "Because sometimes the wing blocks the ear, sir. When we bank, the wing becomes a wall in between. So the captain is trying to bank as little as possible when he needs to listen closely. The old man nodded, waving his compass needle. So one must listen with the whole body, not just the ear. Yes, Lan Chi thought. The entire fuselage was the ear, and the captain was using his body to listen. As LA-457 neared descent, dawn turned gray-blue. A thin veil of cloud drifted, the wind less unruly. Kunming Control handed them to a lower frequency. Farmland below was patterned like a wet chessboard. This was where signals might fade. The station, half hidden by terrain, plus wing shadowing, made the plane's ear hesitant. ILS-22 approach, Dung reviewed. The localizer is ahead to the right. Best use the nose antenna. Avoid right bank during frequency capture. Remind tower. If signals weaken, ask them to repeat critical instructions 3 times, Hao said. And keep phrases short, easy to catch, Dung relayed. The controller's calm voice came back. Roger, we'll keep it crisp. At the initial fix, descent began. During the procedure turn, Hao chose not the standard teardrop, but a wider base turn with limited bank, trading fuel for thicker signal threads. Quality stayed good. The localizer line twitched, then locked like a magnet needle. For intercept, Hao rolled gently, only 10 degrees. Tower's voice came clear. Cleared to land, wind calm. Suddenly, a fine rain band appeared ahead. The wind shifted slightly. Hao needed a correction. He looked at Dung. Both knew. A heavy right bank would block the ear to the southeast tower. Hao chose the nose method. Rudder plus 8 degrees of bank, adjusting thrust slightly. The aircraft obeyed like a great fish, smooth-bodied. Established, Dung breathed. Glide slope alive. Capture. Poppy lights showed red-white, then 3 red, 1 white. Rain speckled. At 1,000 feet, tower said, continue. At 500 feet, stable. Hao held steady, nose just high enough, wings not blocking the last words. Touchdown, spoilers up, reversers roar. The runway swallowed the aircraft like hands catching a child. The applause wasn't loud. It was like the sound of a promise kept. Lan Chi closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them and smiled at the compass old man. He placed a hand on his heart. Now I hear clearly. That afternoon, in Lian Ah's hangar, the 737 was lifted for inspection. Engineer Hai spread the antenna diagram on the table, pointing. 1 VHF under the belly near wing fairing, 1 in the nose, 1 on the tail for HF. He explained, at steep banks, the wing fairing blocks the belly antenna from stations on the slope side. The fuselage wing geometry creates RF shadows. It's normal, but if the route needs frequent vectors, the impact shows. The solution lies in both operations and engineering. Operationally, Hai listed, limit bank when listening for instructions. Plan listening slots. In procedures, prioritize nose antenna when stations are ahead, belly when behind. Use relays when banking steep, and control smoothly to avoid constant wing rocking. Technically, he suggested, add a 3rd VHF antenna on the spine, diversity, or relocate the belly antenna to a less shadowed spot if the structure allows. Also update RF shadow maps for each aircraft type. Simple diagrams showing which directions cause deaf spots. You can't always add antennas, Hai admitted. Paperwork, certification, testing, but operational knowledge can apply immediately, like you did today, Hao noted, adding, simulator training, maintaining comms under shadowing, low bank technique, rudder, power track control, planned listening windows, peer relay, SOP. Dung added, make a pocket card for pilots, where the station is, which bank to avoid, which antenna to use. That night, they sat on the hangar railing, the 737 resting like a sleeping whale. The air smelled of paint and fuel. Lan Chi brought ginger tea, cups steaming like visible RF threads. I'll remember the phrase sandy nose toward the lamp, Dung said. Yes, Hao smiled. In life, too. Don't lean too much toward things that block important voices. Keep yourself a listening slot. Lan Chi looked out at the silver runway. She thought of faces on the plane, of sleep, of held hands, and of thin paint layers. Bolts weighing grams, antennas placed just right. All were instruments in an invisible orchestra. When the conductor knew to dip the nose lightly, slow a bit to avoid heavy bank, the orchestra spoke with a clear voice. Weeks later, Lian A issued a short notice to crew. In complex terrain or frequent vector areas, apply comms keeping techniques. 1. Avoid banking toward the active station. 2. Prioritize antennas according to front-back geometry. 3. Plan listening slots during approaches. 4. Request peer relay when steep turns required. 5. Simplify comms language when quality poor. 6. Report RF shadow cases to OCC for map updates. Attached was a humorous sketch. An airplane with 2 ears, one on the nose, one on the belly, with wings sometimes, covering its ears. LA 457 returned to the same route one honey golden sunset. Leaving Kunming, Dung looked at the mountains, dark as long shadows, and smiled. Mountains outside, mountains inside. Hao held straight a few seconds longer before turning, creating a thin, listening slot. The controller's voice sang, Liena 457, cleared direct, good evening. That voice was a handshake. In row 18, the compass old man returned, this time with his granddaughter. He pointed out the window. See, child, the wings are as beautiful as clouds, but sometimes they block the ears too. She asked, So what do we do, Grandpa? He winked. We bank less and listen more. The sky darkened, thin as plum skin. The 737 flew on, its ears wide open, not because they had grown, but because it had learned not to cover them. And where invisible waves brushed the metal skin, one could hear, if listening closely, a very small sound. The sound of understanding, when humans learn how to place themselves rightly among the obstacles they carry.